But this building is really important to us because it's right in the middle of our 1,000 acres. It's right in the middle of our master plan community here where A&M's coming right through us. And we sat across the street in a double wide trailer and coveted this place once Nutribullet left. And we convinced our public partner, the city of Bryan, to bring it into our public-private partnership about a year ago. And so we're making good progress on the outside looking in. It doesn't look like we're making good progress because our furniture is not here yet. But our furniture is stuck in container ships somewhere off the coast of who knows what state. And we'll have furniture. We just started getting a little bit last week, lots of furniture by hopefully Christmas time and then February. But we're gaining on it. We have a good membership base. So what we're doing here is basically a WeWork type of co-working setup for companies who don't have offices in the Brazos Valley but want to be here and recruit students and recruit talent and research and want to come in town and have a nice place to hang out for a day or two, right? That's part of it. But the bigger part of it is working with Shelley and others to stand up an innovation culture in Bryan College Station. We're not the university. We're not going to compete against the university. We're just another outlet of entrepreneurship and innovation, a place that people can gather and meet people. So if you think about the collision of capital, talent, and ideas, that's what we're trying to do here, those three elements, capital, talent, and ideas. So in that regard, Shelley asked us to start doing a startup grind here, which has been a lot of fun. And we've had some great guests. And Jason from Houston, we had a good time playing golf today, and he's a fellow Rice alumni, and he'll tell you about that. But we're just really pleased to have you here. Thank you for being here, Jason.
Thank you to Shelley for having me. Appreciate
So while we start, why don't you just tell them a little bit about Tupper Lake. Let's start with Tupper Lake Partners and what you guys do.
So Tupper Lake is a venture investing group. We focus on energy technology enablement, all the way from upstream drilling oil wells to putting up solar plant panels and wind farms. Our mission in life is to make energy cheaper, faster, and more affordable for everybody, and we do that through technology. So our power alleys are software, battery technology, and Internet of Things, anything that's an instrument that can collect data that we can run hard assets on faster. There are 4 finance professionals like myself, former investment bankers or private equity professionals, and then 6 executives who've run very large businesses. One Aggie of note is Joe Bob Perkins, who's a graduate of Texas A&M, a great ag, and ran a company called Targa Resources in Houston, 4th or 5th largest midstream company. The idea is we put people like Joe Bob, and there's 6 Joe Bobs in our group, and we put them in, we make them the hands-on management executive of those groups. We have the CEO, but someone who can also be the chairman on a day-to-day basis. And so we've looked at 40 plus deals. We've funded a couple of deals, both in the software space, but we've looked at, like I said, deals all across the spectrum, and we're having a lot of fun doing it. It's been a good run. I'll say that the most things we've been spending time on are energy transition type ideas, right? So as we've spent more and more time with management teams and thought about the innovation that exists and the opportunity, as a seasoned professional, I'll call myself, and I look at some fresher faces out there, it's an opportunity of a lifetime for everybody out there who's kind of at the beginning of their career or still in the university. The challenge to get to 2050 carbon neutrality, or the ambition to do that, is going to take 25,000 rooms just like this all over the world. And so I think it's really exciting to think about A&M being a part of this, Houston, Austin, Dallas, and the state of Texas being a part of that innovation. There's a lot of capital formation, which we'll talk about, but this is a challenge of a lifetime. It's not going away, and it's very exciting. I think there's going to be a lot of careers made, a lot of capital deployed, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I'd love to be sitting in your seat right now, because that is absolutely how I'd be spending my time, and I'm voting with my time and my dollars. That's how I'm spending my time. So that's Tupper Lake.
Very cool. Very cool. So, native Houstonian, right?
Yes, sir.
Native Houstonian. So tell us about your upbringing and how you kind of got into investment banking and into the energy space.
Yeah, so I was an investment banker before this for about 19 years. I grew up in Houston, oldest of 3. My parents both ran small businesses. Originally, they both worked corporate. My dad worked from the oil and gas business on the accounting side. My mom as a salesperson. But early on, when I was kind of in middle school, they started their own businesses, and so I kind of saw day one what being an entrepreneur was like. Our kitchen table, I like to say, was our boardroom table, because there would be discussions about hiring, firing decisions, budgeting. Not every year was a good year. It was a very interesting family to grow up in, because we had a lot of this. The fortunes came and went with the Houston economy and how my parents' businesses went. But it was a great training ground. I worked in my dad's accounting business when I was young, his CPA practice. I learned how to do ledger accounting, learned how to sell to new clients, actually, as a young guy. But through that, I fell in love with finance and business, and went to Rice, and learned how to code computers. My first job out of school was Anderson Consulting, so I was actually had a very technical first 5 years. Then I went to business school at Harvard and went into investment banking.
Where again? No,
it's in Boston.
I've never
It's
heard
in
of
Boston. They call it the A&M of
Cambridge.
they call it the A&M of Cambridge.
But George Will actually called it what he said it's the Rice of the Northeast, or Rice is the Harvard of the South.
Yeah, something like that.
Anyway, Harvard, India.
Hey, listen, Harvard was a great school. It was a great place to meet people from all over the world, and really just kind of, like Shelley said, to expand your perspectives and horizon. I always wanted to come back to Texas. My wife had a great job here. I've been married almost 20 years next year. She's my best friend and my partner in life.
And so microphone is on.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yes.
We have 2 kids, junior and a sophomore in high school, and that's a whole other part of our life. But came back to Texas, worked in investment banking, did oil and gas through the shale boom, and just had a great run. Did deals all over the world. Worked at 3 or 4 investment banks. But when the opportunity came to work in venture investing and to take on this new challenge, it was kind of a no-brainer. So I've been having fun doing that ever since.
Very good. Very good. So what about your family upbringing? Taught you any kind of entrepreneurship, like struggles and stories and those things? You mentioned some books that you had around the house and.
Yeah, so my family was really into, I guess at the time you would call it self-help books, the personal development type stuff. So I see some of these quotes from Zig Ziglar on the Lake Walk Innovation Center walls, and that's like the stuff I grew up with. So a lot of Tony Robbins, a lot of Zig Ziglar, a lot of Brian Tracy. These are names you may or may not know about. But it really came down to, how do you set goals? How do you manage yourself? How do you interact with people? Dale Carnegie was like right next to the King James Bible in my house. And so it's like, how do you, if you want to be interesting, act interested in other people, that sort of thing. And so, that was a big part of our family life. And my parents, I'd be driving to school and they'd be listening to, sales training on the tapes, on the way to school. So had a lot of that growing up, but a lot of, other than the sales, was just, how to hire people, right? I remember, do I hire this person, or this person isn't performing, do I fire them, or should I partner with this person or not? Like, these conversations would go on, and I'm like 12 or 13, and that's the dinner table conversation. And so it was a real, sort of inculcation over time of a small business owner and how they think about risk, time risk, money risk, and this was real stuff. I mean, it didn't go well a few times, and they just made the choice for me to go to this private school. It wasn't an expensive school, but it was still a private school, and I looked like I might not, that we might not be able to make the tuition bill, and I went to the priest and I said, hey, listen, I might have to, withdraw for a little while. We're having some cash flow issues. I don't think I used those words, but something to that effect. And they said, no, don't worry about it. We'll take care of it, right? And so it wasn't always rosy. And so what it taught me, or what I remember about it, was like, look, you got to be very, very sure about your idea, very sure who you work with. That specific problem had to do with, I think, if I recall, a bit of an overinvestment into a bad market. Just to summarize that story, if I recall what happened. And so just being very cautious about that. And so when I decided on how I was going to spend my time out of college, I really went with a large, safe corporate experience. The difference was that I always had this entrepreneur mindset. So went to work for Accenture, and I wanted to go work on like the high growth area. I didn't want to go work on SAP, if anybody knows what that is, which is tried and true. We're gonna, I wanted to go work for the guy who was gonna go put a system in at a company that like never did work with Accenture, right, or Anderson at the time, and I wanted to do something like that. And so every role I chose within larger organizations was essentially an entrepreneurial type role, but it was safe in that I wasn't putting my own money at risk, my family wasn't gonna go hungry, I wasn't gonna have to pull my kid out, I didn't have kids, but I wasn't gonna have to pull my kid out of private school. But sort of that risk-taking mindset, but more with my career rather than my capital and my family. So that's how it affected me.
So did you choose energy, or did energy choose you in terms of the timing of entering the cycle, right? When did you enter the cycle?
So I think it chose me in that, I was a Houston native, and I started at Accenture, Anderson at the time, in the mid-90s, and most of our clients were power companies and energy companies, and at that time natural gas was deregulating, power was deregulating. That was the ascent of Dynegy and Enron and all those companies. It created a ton of value. All the midstream companies were becoming disaggregated. That's frankly a lot of the wealth that we all enjoy here at Texas A&M, universities like Texas A&M and UT. It's all because of, and that was Reagan driven, right? Because of the airlines and all the deregulation that happened. That was just another set of deregulations, and so energy chose me. There was the smartest people in my cohort were power traders and consultants and investment bankers, and that's what everybody was doing, and so that's how it chose me. And then coming back from Harvard, it was really the shale boom, right, that like pulled us back.
When was that? What year was that?
2002. It was really gas had bounced off the bottom, natural gas. Oil was still kind of sketchy, but the capital markets were starting to get smarter and forming around oil and gas. And within, by 05, 06, we were off to the races for, what was, a decade and a half of growth. So.
Yeah. So what did your Harvard buddies think of your decision to get into energy in Houston?
So there's a joke that says, whatever Harvard graduates are doing, short that industry. And in 02, that industry, or 102, that industry was real estate. No offense.
No, we understand the cycles.
Yes, and you timed them well. And so everybody was doing real estate, some form of real estate, either a hedge fund or private equity or developer, and literally everybody went into that. The number of my class of 800 and something that went into oil and gas, I think were like 3 or 4 of us. There's Scott Rowe, who was the CEO of Cameron, and now he's the CEO of another company. A guy who was a CFO, like 4 of us. So there was like 4 of us that went into this, 5 of us maybe, and that was it. So they thought it was stodgy and old and gross and not where the action was, right?
Because they had lost a bunch of money.
Lost a bunch of money.
Pretty recently, right?
Yeah.
And so
in the late
what
90s.
are you doing in this industry that's
Right.
going away and all these things, right? So, so fast forward. So let's talk about Tupper Lake and kind of what your, how did you come to the decision? I mean, you were having a successful investment banking career, right? You were doing well. We'll talk about sales here in a little bit. But you could have stayed on that path and kept doing that, or did you get bored, or did you just see an opportunity, or what happened?
Yeah, so what happened was the bank I was at, so we had gone from 10th to like 4th or 5th in our market from the time that I at BMO. It was called Bank of Montreal. It was a large Canadian bank. We were 4th or 5th in pretty much every investment banking category, and we're doing really well. As a result of ESG pressures, everybody knows what ESG is here, they decided to exit the business at the end of last year. So that shuttered, they laid off everybody, and I had a lot of opportunities to go back into investment banking, and I thought, well, hate what BMO did. By the way, if we pro forma, or if we look at what the amount of fees and money we would have made this year if we had stayed together, it would have been enormous. We were set to have the biggest year ever. So it wasn't because of performance, it was because of a sort of shareholder ESG issue. But I had other opportunities to go back to investment banking, and I thought, well, BMO may have had it right. I hate what their decision was. I hate the timing of it. It wasn't very fun, but I think they had it right. So why go back into that industry that is, under a lot of pressure, struggling with a lot of third-party stakeholder issues, a shrinking fee pool, right? It's a shrinking market, if you put your MBA hat on. Why go back into that? Or let's go do something that's like high impact. Let's go do something that's gonna like change the world in its own way, right? Because what's ahead of us as at least, and this is me, my own editorializing, what's ahead of us to get to 2050 is a challenge of a generation. And everybody, if they could pick their own patch of dirt and plant their flag on it and get to work, like we may just get there. We may just get there. And I thought that was way more interesting than selling the next oil and gas company, than doing the next oil and gas merger, like doing the next IPO for an oil and gas company. Like I'd done that so many times over and had done it really well. I thought this was way more interesting thing to do, was focus on transition, focus on the capital that could be put to work there, and that's how I chose it, right?
And so was it expected that you would never work with those upstream companies ever again because they're old and stodgy and fossil fuel, and now all of a sudden you're seeing these upstream companies actually make these changes, right? So are you right back to working with those companies in some way, shape, or form?
I am.
Kind of beyond that.
No, I am, and I just want to be clear, I don't know where this video will turn up, but I think the industry has relevance for the rest of our lives. It's impossible to live in the world that we want to live in and the lifestyle we want to have, and all of our friends and family on the other side of the world and brothers and sisters without oil and gas, right? It's impossible. When has anybody ever gotten a raise and bought a smaller car or a smaller house? So you're facing a population, people continue to rise out of poverty globally, and they're gonna want things that consume oil and gas. I think oil and gas is a very relevant industry. I think from an investment banking standpoint and a fee pool, I think it's less attractive from a business person or entrepreneur standpoint, which is how I consider myself. I'm a business person who happened to be an investment banker. I think it's less interesting. So, as a matter of fact, I serve on a public company oil and gas board. They're a large natural gas producer on the East Coast. I think we have a lot of upside in our share price. Of course, I'm a board member, so I believe that fundamentally. But I truly believe that our gas is valuable to powering that side of the world. And so, but I think in terms of, for me personally, where I want to spend the most of my time impacting is going to be around technology and renewables. So how much is a solar project really worth? How much does that wind farm really worth? Should you build a wind farm there? Should you put a solar farm there? What are sort of the economics around that? All that today is done very manually. So back in 2003 or 4, when we first started looking at oil and gas wells and shale wells that we all know and love now, we did that manually. Like it would take us, we would hand plot things. It was very labor intensive, very slow. And then eventually AI and machine learning took over, and it became much faster. That's what we're trying to do, but in renewables and power analytics. And so we funded that company. The first company, Datagration, we funded about a year ago in November. And the second company, Arenio, we funded in April. We've got 10 companies right now that have signed on, and it's we had sales meetings Tuesday in Houston and Thursday today in New York. Uptake's amazing. People are really getting after it because there's literally nothing in the marketplace like this. I mean, it's the classic vacuum filling solution, because if you think about $2 trillion being spent over the next 2 or 3 decades, people are going to want to know if they're going to make money off that, and we're in the middle of that, trying to figure that out with them as we put more renewables in. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, so you talked about the big problem, right? If you don't have a problem to solve, right, you don't have a sale, right?
Right.
We talked about sales. And sales, is not a bad word, right? We were talking on the golf course that eventually, when it comes down to it, we're both salespeople, right? And you don't really think of yourself as a salesperson. And sometimes there's a negative connotation to the fact that you're a salesperson, right? But really, if we weren't salespeople, we wouldn't have a hotel and a golf club and innovation center and partners and investors and things like that. So you have to be a salesperson. So I understand sales is pretty important to just your personal, achievement here. So I thought it was a great story about how you focused on that.
Yeah, and I mean, again, a lot of fresh faces, a lot of seasoned faces out there, but I mean, I would put forth that everything in life is a sales, and sales can be a negative word, but I don't think it is. I think sales is about problem solving. It's about connecting people. It's about understanding what kind of solution your platform or team could provide. I grew up with two salespeople. I was trained and baptized in the sales vernacular early on. I didn't really understand what that means, but over the years, as I watched other people, navigate their careers and navigate client situations, I came to decide, well, if I really want to differentiate myself, I have to embrace this part of it. And even as a capital provider, you have to embrace that part of yourself because, yeah, I mean, I have capital and I have really smart executives to put to work, but there's a lot of guys with that. So then what does it become about? It becomes about being with that potential partner, or potential client, or potential counterparty a lot. You have to spend a lot of time with them. You have to understand what their needs or wants are. You have to understand what their problems are. You have to you have to hold yourself accountable. So you have to log how many times you're visiting with people, right? So if you're truly dedicated to the craft of whatever it is you're doing, and it could be even internal sales, right? Like if you are a developer, right, Derek? If you're, and you go more than a day or two from talking to your, internal stakeholder, is that a good thing? Probably not, right? You need to be talking to them multiple times. I don't know what that metric is, but you should set one. So it's just having that sort of discipline and cadence around sales. So for me as an investment banker, that was what I felt like my differentiator is if I can be in front of clients this many times, I can't control the market, I can't control whether a deal closes, I can't control any of that. What I can control is how many meetings I have. Like it comes down to that. Like how many meetings can you have? And how many good meetings, and what are you saying, and who are they with, and are you asking for referrals, and are you asking for new ideas? And so I came up with this whole sort of framework on that, and the way I came up with it was through going through a sales training class. Paid it out of my own pocket. I would recommend anybody who is serious about this type of part of their career do something like this. I went to Sandler Sales. I think it's the best one that's out there because it's sales with integrity. Again, is there a problem to solve? Are you being honest? That sort of thing. Their one sentence mantra is most people close, they qualify their leads on sales this much, and they try to close this much, right? It's actually should be the opposite. You should qualify hard, close easy. Most people qualify easy. They're very lazy on qualifying. Like, oh, that guy, yeah, he wants to do a deal. Let's go talk to him. Oh, yeah. And then they spend a lot of time with them and they waste their time. So it should be close or qualify hard, close easy, not the other way around. So spend a lot of time understanding your opportunity set. And honestly, no is okay. Like you want no's. Like you want people, you want to understand. Like I'm working on something right now with Tupper Lake in the venture world, and it's like, I don't think that we fit. Like I just don't. And I think that's okay. And I got to that no pretty quickly, and then you move on. Because at the end of the day, all you have is your time to spend. And so knowing how to get to know quickly, which sounds crazy because there's the book that's called Get to Yes. No, you should get to know. Because if you get to know faster, you'll get to more yeses. So anyway.
It's the old Fuller brush salesman, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Fuller brush salesman used to knock on your door before I was born, right? Knock on your door and sell brushes, and all kinds of different things. And their mantra was, just get the quick no, right? Your worst day is to talk to somebody for 30 minutes or 45 minutes, and then they don't buy the brush or the vacuum cleaner, right? And so, and the attitude is when that door gets slammed in your face, you go, awesome, I'm that much closer to the sale, right? Then if you keep the funnel this big, you're eventually going to get to the results. And so it's all about getting your funnel set and being disciplined
Get to the
with
no.
the approach.
And tracking it.
Right.
It's hard. It takes a lot of energy, but I mean, I would put forth that when you get to the yeses, they feel a lot better. And by the way, you know why you got to them. My biggest fear, because I've done the reason when I took this mantle up, I'd already done really well. Like I'd already done really well in investment banking, had gotten the title, had gotten all the, financial accolades and all that stuff, and, written about and all that. But I'm like, well, can I repeat it? How do you repeat it? How do you Moneyball this or Tom Brady this, right? Like, how do you go win not one Super Bowl, but 6 or 7? And the only way I could figure out how to do it was to create this business development playbook, call it sales playbook, call it whatever you want. And I think it's relevant even if you're internally focused, right? But especially if you're externally focused, trying to build a business, trying to get more customers, trying to get more investors, that sort of thing. I think it's important.
So how'd your partners pick you, or how did you pick your partners?
So the ringleader of this group is a former Warburg Pincus. If anybody knows who Warburg Pincus is, they're one of the largest private equity groups in the world. Very successful oil and gas franchise for many years. The lead of that was a client of mine. We had done many transactions together, and when I was a big user of one of his software companies, and it really liked it. And when we were doing the same thing in the renewables business, the Orenia business, he asked me if I wanted to come on and help them write the offering memorandum and help build the model and do all that. And so I said, of course, I would love to do that. I had free time, and so that's how it worked. And it's kind of gone from there. So, it wasn't one of these things where it was a bit like dating my wife, in that I didn't date her to marry her. We just sort of eventually decided this was the best, this was the best thing that could happen to both of us, and it was kind of the way it happened now. That's probably overstating the Tupper lake is kind of not the best analogy, but it just sort of happens organically, I guess is the way to say it.
So you're happy with the 6, right? Set with 6?
We need 10 or 12 of those executives, because the reality is, if they spend a quarter of their time or a third of their time on one of these situations, their plate gets pretty full pretty quickly. So we think they can work on 1 or 2. And so if we could, we'd get, 10 or 12. And we're constantly, or not constantly, but we've started looking through that, our Rolodexes and adding. We recently added a battery technology professional. He built the largest battery tech business and sold it to a private equity group out of Johnson Controls. So we added Joe. He's been working with us, Joe Wallachy, and so. But we'd love to add more. We're seeing a lot of opportunities, like I said, in battery tech, a lot in sort of instrumentation. So we could add some more folks there.
Any stats on energy usage, next 10, 20, 30 years, and as far as just why you think this is a great space, macro-wise?
Yeah, I think to start on the traditional side, we're consuming about 100 million barrels, round number. It's actually true. We were consuming about 100 million barrels a day in oil before the pandemic. We cratered down to about 84 when the world shut down. So that kind of tells you.
Didn't shut down a whole lot.
It did, yeah. You can kind of tells you that's kind of the trough of what you could consume from an oil standpoint. We'll be back north of 100 by the end of the year, and we'll probably be at 115 or 120 when we peak. So oil is not going away. That's why we believe that anything that makes oil cheaper to produce, more efficient to produce, that sort of thing is really important, because oil's not going away.
And carbon capture. And
the carbon capture is going to be a part of that as well. If you look at what renewables and will take in terms of market share, it's significant, but it's still, if you go from 3% solar usage now to, I think to get to 10 to 15% is going to be a big steep climb over the next decade or so, and it causes all sorts of other knock-on opportunities, is what I'll call it. Things like grid scale battery storage, right? Because of intermittent supply. How do you load manage, our society, right? We're so used to flipping on the switch or turning on the washing machine. So I think there's going to be I see it all the time. I feel like for a few weeks, everything I saw on my desk was load management software or solutions, right? Turn your water heater on at 11 a.m., store the hot water, till 4 o'clock, and then, use it later in the day, right? So there's a bunch of solutions like that are out there. But I think that power consumption globally or our energy consumption is going to go up. I think our share in the Western world of renewables is going to continue to go up. But I mean, oil's, probably only give like less than 10% away in terms of market
And
share.
hence Texas, right? I mean, Texas seems to be the
Tex-
logical place to base all of this.
Yeah, largest solar and wind producer in the country. I think we have a lot of skill set in the traditional energy space of how to manage and deploy energy. I think all of the below ground understanding that traditional guys who punched holes in the ground to get oil out is the same technology, or the same skill set you would use for carbon capture and sequestration. Texas benefits from a very large coastline and a lot of petrochem with a lot of emitters, and we're going to be able to capture that and put that in. And we also have a lot of below ground assets that people aren't aware of because you don't see them, where we can deposit. So you capture the CO2 instead of emitting it. You can capture it and literally put it under the ground. We have I don't want to say almost unlimited, but pretty much unlimited. We could capture over 100 years of carbon, underground in Texas, and not even
Wait, salt domes? Are they using salt domes for that?
salt domes and
And just
yeah,
abandoned wells.
and just
right?
abandoned wells.
Yeah,
Exactly right.
Exactly.
And like
Abandoned
so,
wells
companies
have
like
been
X,
PMA'd, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
and like Exxon's got a $100 billion project offshore. A little Talos, which is an offshore company, is doing several projects. So, I mean, it's ripe. It's ripe.
Did anybody see the Texas Monthly article on engineering in Houston and the green revolution, the clean energy revolution? Did you see it, Derek? You're shaking your head, whatever. Really interesting article. So I'm a petroleum engineer by education. My wife is, my youngest son is. Houston is the leading, there's more engineers in Houston than any other city in America. It's crazy. And it's like an engineering capital of the United States. You have all this great talent. And so now what's happening in Houston in this market is basically this revolution to, okay, well, if we're not going to be doing this forever, how can we take these smart people who are entrepreneurial and let's transition to the next step, right? So it's pretty phenomenal that it's catching on so fast. And Houston is just this incredibly entrepreneurial, innovative culture where people like Jason are ready for people to walk in their door proverbially with that business plan and go, hey, let's try something new. Let's figure it out.
Yeah.
A lot of cities in the United States just aren't set up that way. And it's hard for people who aren't from Houston. Like, I'm a native Houstonian. I worked in Boston, New York, all kinds of cities like you did, not as long as you did. But the attitude is different. The attitude is, sorry, we're not going to talk to you if you're not so-and-so. Houston's just different. So I think you're located in a fantastic spot for what you're doing.
I think A&M is too. I mean, you guys are 90 minutes from all of this. And frankly, in the middle of it, the more the tech and innovation comes here, you're more and more a part of it. And Houston is not Detroit. Like, I would not short Houston. Like, don't even think about it. You'll lose that bet every time because of the entrepreneurs, because of the talent, because of institutions like A&M. And so I think it's an inevitability, but there's a ton of work to do, which is great for all the talent that's in this room. And even if you're not directly focused, I mean, there's a lot of adjacent, opportunities that to service companies that are a part of this. So I think everybody's going to benefit from this. It's pretty exciting.
Well, we appreciate you being part of the Innovation Center for sure.
Thank you for
This is
having
great.
us.
Let's open it up to questions. I'm kind of, tapped out of my questions. I keep asking them. You guys probably have better questions than I do. So, yes, sir.
So just from a general investor perspective, when talking about investing in a startup, they usually say that people, product, and other P's are important. So when discussing people, how does having an international founder in a startup that you are looking to fund affect your decisions? And are there any quantitative or qualitative measures that you use to judge the founders?
Look, the founders are critical. Like, David Wesson, who's got us a part of this. I mean, that's like a big part of his thesis, right? There was a company that we decided to invest in. Tupper Lake decided not to invest in it for a couple of reasons, but David and some others of us decided to invest in it because we really believed in the team. We thought they knew how to sell, they knew their technology, they knew how to scale, and we were willing to take a bet. And so I think the people are really important. The country of origin of the founder is not, I mean, we just like ideas and people who know how to put technology together. I would say probably the only, well then qualitatively, one more qualitative thing is, has this person worked in that industry and sold into that industry? I think the companies that feel like they have the biggest impact are the ones who've actually, interestingly, been consultants before to that industry. So they might have been consultants and they're like trying to help this company, companies like get better at, some supply chain or what have you. But then why don't we build a tool or an app, and then we're gonna like basically take that app and scale it for this company and this company and this company. So they know how to sell because they've had to sell their services. So that to me is the biggest qualitative thing. And then quantitatively, the only criteria for founders for venture investing is that person putting their own money into. Now, if they don't have money, that's fine, but are they fully dedicated to putting their time in? So those are the two. That's really the only quantitative thing. But there's no scorecard or metric or any of that.
Well, but headquarters in Texas or
for us
or US
specifically,
or whatever.
we've looked at companies in Finland, we've looked at companies in Norway, UK, North Carolina, Chicago, Boston. Yeah, no, we're sort of HQ agnostic. So.
Who else? Yes, sir.
To follow up on that question, what would you say is the number one variable that is dependent on if you're going to invest into a startup? Like, is it the founders? Is it the idea? Is it the timing of entering the market? The management?
Yeah, so I created, because we were having a lot of these debates, I tried to create a rubrics around this, and I would say people was number one, and we had this whole debate about weighting and all this stuff. I should pull it up on my phone, but I won't. Weighting was heavily towards people, right? So people was a big issue. Second was, we call it the moat. What's the sort of competitive advantage that this entity has, the idea, right? In certain instances, we see, like if you're Starbucks, right? When you're Starbucks and you're in 1996, like how can you get someone to pay $2.50 a cup of coffee, right? When they're used to paying 75 cents or getting it for free at the office. So how can you get someone to pay and change what they do, right? Like, so now they have to stop at some place and change their workflow. How hard is that? So that idea, that change management, that's the next part that we look at. The burn rate, right? So we look at, okay, what's the burn rate of this company? What do they really need to grow the company to get it to where it needs to be? And do we agree with that? And then, finally, what is, and there's many more, but I'm summarizing it. Finally, like, what is the exit opportunity for them and for us, right? We're all going to be in this together. Do we feel like there is going to be, if you're selling into the coal industry, I'm making this up, if you're selling into the cigarette industry, like your exit's going to be, questionable, right? So we want to know that there's going to be a viable market opportunity because of all the other things, the moat, and how you spend your money, so that when you sell eventually, or we get the next round, all that it'll be a fruitful outcome. So those are probably in summary what we look at. So the other thing I would say is, if you're a founder, if you're going with a business plan, one of the biggest mistakes I see is I feel like two mistakes. One, there isn't a strong command of who your real competitor, of who your competitors are. That's our sort of superpower. It's Tupper Lake. Is you can tell us your idea and we go, okay, I'm gonna go call 5 guys in the next 3 days and see if that's right. Because I know the companies you sell into, that's happened, right? And we can go, yeah, that's a science project. Wish them the best, probably not for us. Or yeah, that thing has legs, let's go. And so having a real strong command of who your competitors are is really good. And then also, it is really important. I see that as a big mistake in a pitfall. The second is having a real strong idea of what the change management and implications are, because that's another competitor. It's actually in the same bucket, because your competitor may be like how someone does their business today may be the biggest competitor. You may have the biggest, coolest, sweetest app ever. If they don't want to change, if it's too much brain damage to integrate it into their business, that's competition that you know, that'll elongate the sale, elongate the burn rate, elongate the capital cycle, and may ultimately lead to not having the scale and success. So that competition and change management is huge.
Great point. Yes, sir.
Thompson.
What are the biggest risks that you see coming up in the oil and gas and technology industry, particularly for like your portfolio companies?
You know, one of the things I've been observing is that every team seems to have because of all these engineers that you know have fallen in love with living in Texas or lifestyle, their kids are now in school. They've all come across these problems that they're trying to solve, and they're all trying to solve very discrete problems. And some of them are important use cases and important ROI to the buyer, but they're all sort of discrete. What I'm curious to see, and I'm not saying I wouldn't invest in a company that's solving a discrete problem, but I am curious, like, you know, 10 years from now when there's, you know, 75 discrete problems that we've tried to solve with all these little apps, right? You know, like I could get food delivery from Domino's, but I use Uber Eats. So is there, like, what's sort of the umbrella solution that we can create around all of these different workflows essentially that we're trying to fix and make better and make more efficient? They all have valid use cases, but it just feels like at what point is there a gag reflex in the marketplace where like, I've already got it, I've already got all those apps, I don't need any more apps. And so that's the part that I'm curious. So is that a risk? I don't know. It could be an opportunity, right? Like who pulls all that together? Anyway.
Yeah, like, I mean, Google project management software, right?
Right.
And just, right?
Yeah.
So it's just amazing how many companies produce project management software. So to your point, you
Yeah.
just go, when do we run out of the need for somebody to go, I'm solving a problem? Are you really solving a problem?
Right.
Because
Yeah.
we're kind of matured, or somebody's found a better way to do it.
Right. Yeah.
Next, yes, ma'am.
So it's actually kind of funny because we were talking about the whole renewable sense earlier today with some people, and kind of just on the base that you were talking about growing up kind of in the foundation of like your dad was in the oil industry, you were in somewhat of the oil industry before too, and the generational divide between that old energy mindset and then reaching into this like newfound renewable kind of questionable thing that a lot of these big companies are not hesitant, like want to go into it, but are kind of weary about the whole thing. More of a personal question, I guess. Is it a capitalization on top of the market or like the possibilities that come with renewables, or is it like an actual vision-based thing for you? And if it is a vision-based thing, how do you confront a lot of the people in those older generations with kind of like exemplifying the importance of the vision or how the renewables are going to grow or develop and work with the oil? Like you said, the oil's not disappearing. So kind of like
Yeah, is it ideological? Like, am I, you know, throwing paint on somebody's, you know, fur coat kind of thing doing this path? No, I'm not. Like, I'm making an analogy you may not understand. I think there's an all of the above strategy that's needed. I think it's impossible for us. I don't think as consumers, I don't think as a globe, we can only do renewables. I think the traditional energy complex they were deniers. I'll just say it out loud. I was part of them. I think even 15 months ago, they were deniers. They're like, renewables is nonsense. It doesn't make any money. You guys don't know what you're talking about. I think fast forward to fourth quarter of 2021, I think everybody's embraced it because the consumers want it, the investors want it, and frankly their employees want it many times, right? And so the way I would say it to the traditional energy companies is you've got to roll at the table. You are not going away. You just need to be cleaner, and you need to be more efficient, and you're not going away. You're fine. There's going to be continued energy consumption. Some of your market share will be taken away by renewables, but we're still going to need you. We're still going to need natural gas, right? That's the funny part is the oil. Yeah, you know what I'm going to say. In February, when everybody was freezing their katushes off, that was actually because of natural gas. It wasn't because of all that internet stuff about the winds freezing and the solar panels freezing. It wasn't that. It was because the natural gas couldn't flow through the uninsulated pipe. You had exposed pipeline and it just flat couldn't. And so as a result, we had no grid power. And so I think everybody recognized, so I don't know if I'm answering your question, but I don't think we should take this to an ideological sense. I think we need to be very pragmatic about it and say we all need to be at the table. We all need to be as efficient and as possible. I do think the challenge, though, I will acknowledge that the challenge with traditional energy, that their issue with renewables is it still actually doesn't make money, most of it. It really doesn't. Mm-hmm. And that's not, I'm telling you, but does that mean we're not going to figure out how that it can make money? That doesn't mean it'll make money eventually. It just doesn't make money now. And so you are, on the one hand, you're yelling at an industry for not making money and destroying capital and, drilling all these uneconomic wells. On the other hand, you're telling them to do cleaner, renewable stuff. Well, you're basically telling them to burn more capital on the front lawn. So they're trying to be good stewards of capital and do what you're telling them to do, yet you're pushing them into doing renewables. I think that's what they're pushing back on. And I don't blame them. And so, again, where are we trying to impact that? Arenia. How do you make better solar and wind farm decisions and grid scale battery decisions? How do you make better CCUS, investments? That's how we're trying to impact it. Datagration, how do you make better decisions on making your oil field cleaner and better and faster? Stuff like using water better, taking trucks off the road. It's all this little stuff that little things add up over time. That's what we're trying to do. So, I don't know if that answers your question.
And it's really, one more question maybe, Shelley. It's really a myth too, to think that the oil industry was never innovative. It's been innovative from day one. The first oil well was basically a big, heavy spike that they lifted up into the air and dropped. Bang, bang, bang. That's how they drilled the well, right? And so Howard Hughes invented the modern downhole bit. That's how Howard Hughes made a ton of money, became a billionaire, right? Hughes Energy. So there's been innovation in the oil and gas space. Rice guy. There's been innovation in the oil and gas
He didn't graduate though.
For everything, right? And so, and there's a bunch of good people in that business who want to see a cleaner world, want to see less emissions, want to see carbon capture, want to see all these things, right? And so, to your point, the people who are fighting them, I always love the people who are in their Patagonia stuff and in their kayak, and they're out in Puget Sound in their plastic kayak, and they're protesting the offshore drilling rig that's about to go offshore, have no idea that everything they're wearing and everything they're paddling and their life jacket is all petroleum based, right? No clue, right? It's all petroleum based. So they need to be careful with understanding that there is a trade-off and it's going to take a little bit of time. I'm interjecting into your startup grind speech here a bit.
No,
it's just going to take time to get through it.
And I'm hopeful that I'm hopeful that policy will understand. One book I would recommend that I read last year was Phil Knight's book, Shoe Dog. Really great book about an entrepreneur. Yeah, literally amazing. And I'm reading a great one now, The Hard Thing About Hard Things, which I think is almost as good as that one. But one of his real two low points in his career there, one, his son dying tragically, and the other one was the child labor issue. And he felt like I try to do the right things but I can't raise wages in a country above the national mean because that screws up the whole economy. Can I afford to pay them $8 or $10 an hour to build Nikes? Yes. But if I do that, that screws up the entire Philippine economy because now all of a sudden there's wage inflation that Nike created. And so it's a very complicated issue. Why am I bringing that up? Because it's a fair trade issue. And if you want the cleanest, fairest energy molecule produced, you need to think about where that comes from. It comes from the wind, it comes from the solar, it should come from the ground. Whose ground?
Nuclear.
But whose ground? Is it better to come from Texas, Oklahoma, Colorado, North Dakota, or someplace where you don't have governance, you don't have women's rights, you don't have, fair trade. I think that's what I hope policy will understand eventually, and maybe it will.
Yep.
We'll see.
One more quick one.
You go ahead.
Sure. I was gonna talk about, or ask you about problem identification. So you guys are focused on energy. Do you have a set of problems that you are looking for companies that are solving, or when you come across a company, how do you, I don't know, approach that problem?
I think like, typically it'll be, we know that having run companies or been a part of companies, we know that everything, you'd be shocked that there's still like paper receipts, that get handed from a guy in a truck to a person on a well site. So whenever we smell a problem like that, we know there's something to spend time on and think about. So we know how manual the industry still is across the whole value chain. And so that's what we're focused on. Is there a specific this is the moonshot? Not necessarily, but we know, intuitively and through having looked at a lot of companies and been part of companies, what, those sort of inefficiencies are. Like even like there was a guy who said, I don't know if anybody, some people study finance and accounting, and typical, 101 will be, well, I want to pay people as long as possible. I want to take as much time to pay people, and then I want to get paid as fast as possible. That's working capital, right? So I'm going to push out my credit card bill for 90 days, and I'm going to hopefully get paid in 60 days, and I'll get that benefit, right? Well, no. In fact, you have a whole team of people bigger than this room that at the 90-day mark are trying to clean up stuff you spent, 90 days ago. Well, why do you need that army of people? Why don't you just validate that, like right now, have a third of the people doing that, and then pay it. You have way more benefit to your cash flow, to your earnings, of your business, just taking care of the problem right now, rather than trying to do some financial engineering later.
Yeah.
So it's just stuff like that. When you see it, you go, oh yeah, I know, that's right. And so then it does the tech hold. What's the tech stack look like? Full development, and then what's the moat? So anyway.
Perfect.
Oh,
Yeah, one more quick one.
yeah. Go ahead.
Sorry. I think it's a good ending question. Do you think that zero carbon emissions is possible by 2050?
I'm no expert on that. I think it's an ambition, and I think it's a worthy ambition. I think most of the data I've seen says it's going to be a challenge, but I think we're going to work towards it. But it's. I think you should assume. I think here's another way to think of it. I think you should assume the capital is going to be spent to try to get there. So
There's a settlement going after. Well, Shelley, thanks for having us.
thank you, Shelley. This
Jason,
is great.
we appreciate you.
Thanks, everybody.